Okay. Well, it's I'm actually going to give you the Mohawk word, the Ratsénhaienhs, Montour, Montour. But for the sake of this, we'll just say Chief Ross Montour of the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake. So I'm one of the chiefs on the 12-member council.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I just wanted to start by speaking a little bit about Bill 96. I know that there has been some action in Kahnawake, especially in May. But I'm wondering what the council's opinion of Bill 96 is, and if this has changed since there has been action following the bill turning into law in May.
Well, the thing is what in fact has changed. I mean, from our perspective, nothing has changed appreciably, and not in a way that um, I would say meets our needs. That doesn't make the preservation of our own language, let alone the French language, any easier than it was before, which was not easy. Um, so and Bill 96 always was a case. And if you said it was about the protection of the French language, I would have to look at the fact that there are 7 million first language French speakers in the province of Quebec. So I really don't see how that language is in danger. But Indigenous languages within the province of Quebec are in fact in danger. And certainly ours, the Mohawk people of Kahnawake, we have been, our language has been under assault for generations now, but the struggle to maintain the language, the cost of which was borne by our own community, has been ongoing since the 1980s. Development of immersion schools at the primary and even younger level, or a number of different programs. But it's still a struggle to say for our students then have to enter, say, into CEGEP and then have all these additional French language course requirements, and so, we were looking for an exemption from Bill 96 as Indigenous people, and I'm going to say that it's not just Kahnawake. I mean, that's province-wide. So, I mean, the Legault government came out with some approach to try and appease the Indigenous people of the province, which was really not an answer to it. It's really just a way to try, in my view, to sort of divide us. Say that we're doing this here, we're going to do this little thing to protect your language, but essentially, nothing really has changed to improve Bill 96 or the amendments to 101. That the same challenges and the same challenges will remain, but it's not just a question of schools and students and so on. I mean, it's across the board in terms of the kind of requirements that people are going to face, say, within professions, within dealing with government. It's always already been a challenge to say if you're doing duty to consult with Quebec ministries, to get courtesy translation, so on and so forth. The issue of courts becomes also an area of concern as well. Having to provide to the Quebec court documents, in French. I mean, that's always the case, but it's just made so much more difficult in our view. I just want to say, at the sort of provincial level, I would say, in terms of Indigenous activity, with respect to Bill 96, you have at the Assembly of First Nations of Quebec and Labrador, we had a meeting 2 weeks ago, and there was a resolution passed there. The First Nations the First Nations Education Centers, FNEC, which looks after Indigenous education within the province, dealing with the federal government and to some extent with the province. So what we have done is we had traveled to Ottawa just in the lead up to the passing of the legislation to meet with ministers and MPs. We met with the leader of the Bloc Québécois, in Ottawa, all of which didn't change anything. So the resolution that was recently passed, this earlier, it's in September, was one wherein the First Nations education centers were filing a complaint with the United Nations, and this is of course related to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And the further resolution was to advance a court action, aimed at an exemption ruling on the constitutionality of Bill 96. Quebec, likes to think of itself as a nation unto itself, and certainly they've been allowed this by the current prime minister leading up to the last federal election, when he came to Quebec and basically said that, not basically, in fact said that Quebec is, the Quebecois are a nation with the right to one official language. And then we got Bill 96, So I don't see and haven't seen much support coming from the federal government in terms of their own responsibilities to Indigenous people. So, again, I would add to that also the fact that as Indigenous people surrounded by Quebec, you have a government, and the current CAQ government, which has been returned to power. 77% of the electoral base. An increase of seats to 88, I believe. So they have a greater majority than they did before, and so the reality of that, Savannah, is that you have a premier who likes to call himself, I understand it's linguistic, the prime minister, but I think that play on words, that translation really, feeds into the idea that, somehow they're a nation. But the CAQ and Legault have refused to, acknowledge or have a part in implementing the United Nations the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Denies that we have an inherent right to self-determination in the province without, ironically, passing the Section 35 test. Okay, and constitutionally, that Quebec is, it is the province of the notwithstanding clause. So, with respect to the Canadian Constitution, it would take the position that it will chart its own course. The other element to that, which is a continuing concern with the return of the CAQ, is that the CAQ government purports to exercise jurisdiction over all lands within the territorial boundaries of Quebec, and this includes Indigenous lands, which right now, on a technical level, are federal. Okay, which even we have the issue with Canada in terms of what is Indigenous land, which is what is Aboriginal title versus reserve status. But so those things that hasn't changed with the election that just passed. So for us, I will say that we knew that they would be returned to power. We also knew that they would likely be returned to power based on polls and so on, with an even greater majority than they had in the previous term. So what does that mean to us? It means that, we know who the government is. We know what the challenges are that which remain, and we know that the battle will have to carry on in terms of recognition, of our rights within this province. It's really unfortunate. Like, if you look at even the United Nations Declaration bill that was passed at the federal level, the fact that they didn't uh, uh, put in law in a coercive way the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery and all of the European doctrines of superiority was a fatal flaw from my perspective, from the perspective of a lot of Indigenous people. Whether the AFN was a part of the passage of that or not. Um, it's already a challenge over there, but I mean in Quebec it's that much more so. So I mean the struggle for us is an ongoing one. It's one that we've survived for 500 years of European presence in our lands, and we're still waiting to have a fair say about our lands, about our own right to self-determination, about our own rights to an economy, so on and so forth. As far as Quebec goes, I mean, what you have since the I'd say the quiet revolution, the not so quiet revolution, back to the early October 1970, so on and so forth, is with the election of the Parti Québécois, which is an outgrowth of the FLQ. What you have is a jurisdiction which really feels like it has no interest in being in the 21st century, but would rather resume where it felt it left off after the Plains of Abraham, which is really about a recolonization, a redux of that, in this century and the last as well.
Thank you for explaining this. I just wanted to go back a little bit sorry, I'm just looking for my notes, to what you were discussing in regards to the meeting 2 weeks ago in relation to UNDRIP and upholding Indigenous languages. Would you be able to provide a little bit more information on this?
Well, what I would suggest is that the word is escaping me. The resolution that was passed in Montreal 3 weeks ago is a resolution that was brought forward, as I said, by the Assembly of First Nations of Quebec and Labrador, which was passed by consensus to support the First Nations education centers in their filing of a complaint with the United Nations based on Bill 96 and the impact to our inherent rights, which are upheld in the United Nations Declaration, and then the resolution specifically also pointed at the eventual bringing forth of a lawsuit, a legal action against the province. For greater detail on that, I would respectfully suggest that you contact Ghislain Picard, the regional chief for the AFNQL.
Okay, great. Yeah. No, I would love to look into that a little bit more because I haven't seen too much coverage on it, unfortunately, but this is huge. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean it's. I mean the press. I believe there were press releases that were sent out. I would have to look and see if I could locate what the actual resolution was. I could perhaps send it along to you, but by all means, please do call Regional Chief Picard, who is the head, is the regional chief for AFNQL. Would be able to speak, I believe, in greater detail to the resolution.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Yes, I'll reach out, and if it's not too much trouble, if you do find the press release, I would be eager to see it. That's great. Thank you so much for clarifying.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
I guess, I have a few other questions, but just in regards to Bill 96, um, what would you like to see the provincial government? I guess maybe not in regards to Bill 96, but just on its own to preserve and protect Indigenous languages. What are the demands from the provincial government to uphold and improve the situation?
The demands from them or on them?
Uh, the
Yeah, no, I
the
mean,
Sorry, go ahead.
okay, so for us, it is an exemption from Bill 96. Those amendments that were made to 101, you know, and that which is going to have a huge impact. You know what? The week after the bill was passed, I happened to hear in my own community in a market two students who were working, and they were talking about actually leaving the province if if and when the impacts were going to be felt at the CJEP level. Now to take that and say this is your home, this is your indigenous land, and then contemplate having to be part of an exodus, which Quebec has seen since the 1970s with the first Levesque government and the first referendum, and even before that you had Robert Bourassa who passed Bill 1, which was the original language law. Okay, and then the PQ promised they were going to do away with Bill 1, and they certainly did. They made it Bill 101. And Bill 101, by the way, the response of Kahnawake was the Kahnawake Survival School. We pulled our students out of schools in Chateauguay, the Howard S. Billings High School, and we started our own high school here because we saw it then. And now that's going back to 1979. That's a long time ago. So since the late 70s, having to deal with politics in Quebec has been a challenge to us, but it's one that we've always faced, and it's one that we've always responded to. So, so the challenge is to say, try and find justice, and really, I'll just say, I'll paraphrase the title of a book written by Harold Cardinal in the late 1960s, talking about Canada as being the unjust society. Well, Quebec is as well, as far as as far as we can tell. And it's too bad because in a time where there's all sorts of lip service to reconciliation and renewed relationships, and what are you renewing? Are you renewing more of the same? That's my question. Because as far as I can see, it's about renewing an entrenchment of business as usual.
So for this story, I'm looking into Quebec Solidaire, and the party has said that they would make amendments to Bill 96 for Indigenous communities within Quebec, and also aim to protect and preserve Indigenous languages in the province. Do you have any maybe reactions to this, or maybe concerns with this party if they were to get into power, delivering these
Well, there it is,
promises?
right? It's one of the biggest two-letter words in the English language. If so, yeah. Well, if I mean, if they do, it remains to be seen. I mean, that's a reality of of Canada in general, whether it's at the provincial or territorial level, or whether it's at the federal level. Okay, you could say, well, if the NDP is ever elected, would they, what would they do differently? What would they promise Indigenous people? So we know at the federal level we and have come to know what the Conservative Party has become. We've known what the policy is with respect to the Indian Act and the dismantling of the Indian Act, and how Canada sees our future with respect to it. How we get out of the, and this goes back to Trudeau. I call him Trudeau the First, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, in the White Paper of 1969. Which was really about, was really modeled on the American exercise of the 1950s, which was, to dismantle the Bureau of Indian Affairs and then get people off the reservations. So that's what Jean Chrétien and Pierre Elliott Trudeau did in 1960, tried to do in 1969. But listen, by the way, even though technically it was stopped from being done wholesale, and almost immediately the federal government began to offload services to the provinces. Clearly, they want us under the jurisdiction. So even there, if you talk about, what does this renewed relationship look like? What are these kinds of governance agreements look like? As far as we can see, it's really to exist as, I'll use the term ethnic municipalities. Okay, that order of government, which is not the inherent right to self-determination. And then that's aside from a lip service. So again, if you said, well, what would any given party promise to do for us? Well, promises are easy. I could promise you the sun, the moon, the stars, and all above. Okay, but in the assumption of power, does that become the reality? You only have to bear in mind, that a party can form a government. Okay, but then you have the senior civil service. And those are the drivers of long-term policy. That's true in the federal government, and I'm certain it's true at the provincial level too. So I would say, Quebec. Actually, we have had meetings with the leader of Quebec Solidaire, and those actually have been decent meetings and conversations. But again, in all fairness, it's one thing, to be open to it. And saying, let's just prove yourself, okay? But when that will happen, it isn't going to happen for 4 years, that's for sure. Will it happen later on, or do people go with what they know? You have in Quebec, you either have the choice between the Parti Québécois, you have the Liberals, you have the CAQ now, and Quebec Solidaire. I don't believe there's not a conservative party of Quebec. So, but it's very difficult, Right now, the practice in Quebec is that of it's a sovereignty without a referendum, why bother, You can get the Prime Minister of Canada, who needs to form a government, needs to get through an election, to either achieve at least a minority government or a majority government. Can't be done without Quebec. So, that's all transactional politics, And we see that all the time, as Indigenous people, as Mohawk people.
Thank you so much. And then what would Ganawage like to see in terms of the Quebec government protecting Indigenous languages? Like, what would this type of law look like, or support look like from the government?
No, I can say it again. We had focus groups within the community. Strategizing community. We wanted to know what the community said. And basically the thing is scrap the law, scrap the bill. That's what would begin to serve our interests, to protect our languages. Okay, so really, what you're talking about is, if nothing else, is an exemption from the bill itself. Right now we know that there are already the constitutional challenges are being advanced. From broadly from the allophone I'll say the allophones segment of society here in Quebec. People have done things like add a year to high school so that you can bypass CEGEP, and then for the moment, be free of the implications of that bill. But I mean, if you did that, you do that today, before the next election, you'll just cover off the universities. And in my view, I'm not saying anything here that they don't already figure on. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Minister of SAA, which is Jan Lafreniere. I mean, it was clear there was a debate that took place, 3 weeks ago, the last gathering General Assembly of the Assembly of First Nations of Quebec and Labrador, and his tack was basically to carry on as he's been doing, is going on his tour of individual communities, and to our mind, as a group, that being AFNQL, basically going around and really, attempting to say divide, doing little things here, cosmetic things here, without changing, the application of that law on our people fundamentally, you know. So, I mean, Quebec right now, I mean, is in the process and has been for a while, basically of, by doing things like that, trying to rule out the federal government, and set up its own Indian department, and its own, and that's what SAA is. But, I'd be even, impacting on, say, the regional offices and policies within there of Indigenous Services Canada at the regional level. We're seeing that with wills and estates, where they're applying Quebec estate law in the transaction of wills and estates within our communities. Meanwhile, Indigenous Services Canada is not is saying they're getting out of the that business, as it were, which is leaving a lot of people stranded in terms of the settling of estates. So.
Thank you. I guess I don't know if you would be willing to answer this, but just in terms of sovereignty, I know that this is not something that the the CAQ would put forward, but other parties such as Quebec Solidaire, would Quebec becoming sovereign have any impact on Ganawage, or if you can speak on this, other reserves in the province?
Well, I mean, I think that's going to be the subject of some sort of a constitutional crisis when it comes down to it. On a personal level, I mean, I've wondered for some time. I mean, the idea of sovereignty. Let me just say something about sovereignty, because language has meaning. Okay. And I don't really subscribe to the idea of sovereignty at, say, a Mohawk level. That doesn't mean I don't believe in self-determination, but that's all about the right of kings, the sovereign. Okay, and so we've been dealing with the expression of the notion of sovereignty, for a few hundred years now. The idea that a king in a foreign land has anything to say about anything that happens over here, over what was our land, to the point where Indigenous people have control over less than 1/10 of 1% of lands within Canada, in any province. So, with respect to that, I mean, my view is, and this is, and also the lead of the Kahnawake Canada Relations Table, is that we told both ministers that we are not sitting at a rights and recognition table for negotiating the way out of the Indian Act, and according to the formula being put forward by the government of Canada. In other words, what we said to them in express language is we're not sitting at termination tables. Okay, we are already practicing self-determination as the Mohawks of Kahnawake. Okay, our discussion is about how you continue to get out of our way and interfere with the exercise of our self-determination. You know, we have never ever as Mohawk people, and I can speak to Mohawk people. I won't speak for Cree, and I won't speak for Tikamek. I won't speak for Innu. That's for them to speak to. But I don't suspect it's all that much different. But it's clearly, as Mohawk people, uh, uh, unique maybe in some respects. The Iroquois people, the Confederates, people who come from the Confederacy nations, have always helped. We have a nation. I have a nation. You know what? I don't have an issue with Canadians per se, or people saying they're Canadians. But somebody in my lifetime decided to legislatively, on the part of Canada, enfranchise me and deem me to be a Canadian. And they never asked me. They never asked my mother. So in 1957, then Prime Minister John Diefenbaker, under his government, what they did was they advanced an enfranchisement of Indigenous people by granting them the granting, quote unquote, citizenship. Well, I don't consider myself a citizen of Canada. Okay, Canada may. Okay, but and then 1961 extended the vote to us. Well, I didn't ask to vote. We don't. Like even here, like in Quebec, whoever forms the government, they're not forming the government one way or the other because of Mohawk people voting, because we do not, as a rule. Now there may be individuals, but for the most part, as a block of people, when we hold to the idea that we are already a nation, okay, and we have every bit as much right to self-determination as the francophone people of Quebec, the Quebecois, okay. If they have a right, if the French reality is that it has a right to being a nation, how much more so do we? This is after all our homeland. So they reside in our lands. Very little of Quebec you could make a case for that, other than the fact that they occupy it. That they legally have title to it.
Thank you so much. I don't have anything else to ask, but is there anything you'd like to share just in regards to Quebec, or maybe specifically Quebec Solidaire and their policies?
Well, I know you brought up Quebec Solidaire, and I want to say something. Um, so we have dealt with, in the last 35 years, 40 years, we have dealt with liberal governments. We have dealt with Parti Québécois governments, okay, and now we're dealing with the CAQ, okay, and the challenges have always been somewhat similar. I would say even the liberals, they were in Quebec fairly nationalistic. Sometimes we got more done with the Parti Québécois. René Lévesque, and I'm not really, somebody's going to sing the praises of René Lévesque, but in some limited sense, he was the first one, to use that term, le Première Nation de Québec, I remember being at a rally back in the 1970s, leading up to the first referendum, where he was using that language, and of course, it was a touchstone kind of event for a lot of the Indigenous people at the time. It wasn't AFNQL; it was the Indians of Quebec Association. But he quickly pointed out that there were going to be some rather stringent limitations to what that meant. in terms of already using, the language of territorial and political integrity of the province of Quebec. So the idea of saying, that you're dealing with, First Nations and recognition of that was limited. But as I said, in some ways, maybe we got more things done with them than without them. Wasn't the case with Jacques Parizeau. Jacques Parizeau, in reviewing 1994 and that referendum, talking before he passed away, was talking rather tough about what he was prepared to do. After 1990, in the so-called Oka crisis, it basically was going to say, as far as our people were concerned, once you separate, you're free. If you want to go with Canada, go with Canada. If you want to go with Quebec, come with us, then come with us, or go on your own. And really, what he was paraphrasing? He was paraphrasing a legal opinion that was sought by the Indigenous people of Quebec. Is what would happen if Quebec actually voted, in a majority to say they were going to separate from Canada. And the legal opinion was, so we had options. Yeah, we could continue on status quo with Canada. We could choose to go with Quebec and roll the dice there, or we could chart our own path. And I think, ultimately, that's as Mohawks, that is our goal, as in as much as that we can exercise a level of self-determination, which is reality-based for us, in ways which are not bound by the dictates or the formulations of either government. Quebec sees itself as a federal. I think you're aware of that. They don't see themselves as a province per se. And certainly, as I said, as long as there is a formal political union with the rest of Canada, if you have the Prime Minister of Canada who needs Quebec saying, you're a nation and you have, this right and that right and so on, and will not defend the rights of Indigenous people, it's a problem.
Thank you so much for making the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.